Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Chip Coldren from CNA, Managing Director of Criminal Justice Projects at CNA. I'd like to just remind everybody, if you're not familiar with how this works, that when you're logged into WebEx, you're automatically put on mute. So if you have something that you want to say at some point, you just have to check your mute status and unmute yourself. So this is the Smart Policing Initiative webinar on sustainability. Our colleague, Mike White from Arizona State University, will facilitate the webinar with participation from 3 of our smart policing sites, Indio, California, Lowell, Massachusetts, and Pullman, Washington, and I believe they'll go in that order. Each of these sites have made significant, and I would say strenuous efforts at sustainability with their smart policing initiatives, and they have achieved some measure of success, as you'll hear. And as many of you know, this is one of a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA, the technical assistance and training provider for the Smart Policing Initiative. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its long-standing support of smart policing. They don't just support it, they champion it. And we thank Mike and his colleagues from smart policing sites for the effort in putting this webinar together. Most of you probably know how important it is to sustain the research-tested practices in smart policing locations. This is important to all of us at BJA, at CNA, and at the smart policing sites. And you probably know how very challenging it is to achieve that measure of success, adoption and integration of proven practices into daily practice. I'm confident that you'll learn something useful about sustainability today. And again, I thank Mike and the sites for bringing their lessons and experiences to us. Permit me to make a few other comments and we'll proceed to the webinar. I think as many of you know, this webinar is recorded for the benefit of those who may view it later on our website. There will be opportunities for questions and participation at the end of each site's presentation, so please make your thoughts and questions known, and I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say. Immediately following the webinar, you'll receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete that evaluation and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. That's it for me. Let me ask Mike White now to begin the presentation.
Quick points before we dive in. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to offer some opening remarks on sustainability and its role in smart policing. And I've been thinking about sustainability for some time now from a number of different perspectives. One, I'm a subject matter expert with BJA on the SPI and have been so for a while now. So if you've been to an SPI conference, a national conference, you know sustainability is an issue that we talk a lot about and think a lot about. And, you know, as an example, about a year ago, I moderated a workshop on sustainability in Lowell, Massachusetts, and we had a number of sites that attended and presented at that. But also, I'm a research partner for one of the sites. I've been the research partner for the Glendale, Arizona site since 2009, and Glendale is finishing up their second SPI grant. So we've been thinking about issues of sustainability from that side as well, in terms of how do we make this, you know, the strategies and things we've been doing, how do we make those last? After those initial remarks, then I'll turn it over to the 3 sites that will be presenting today on issues of sustainability in each of their projects, in Indio, Lowell, and in Pullman. And then after that, I'll come back and close things down with some thoughts and points on some of the issues that were raised in each of the presentations. So I think any discussion that we have about sustainability should begin with defining what we mean when we use that term. And what I've done is I've taken a slide from Nola Joyce's webinar. Nola's with the Philadelphia Police Department, and she had put together a webinar sometime ago on sustainability, and this was one of her slides, and I really liked the way that she laid this out, so I figured I'd borrow it. And Nola says that sustainability involves embedding change so that it survives over time. So that's the first important point we need to recognize with sustainability, is that we're talking about change. You've done something differently, and when you're thinking about sustainability, that means that you would like to make that change last beyond the grant period, for example. The other assumption then with making change last is that change must have produced some sort of desired effect or outcome. So it delivered on what you hoped it would deliver on, and that's why you'd like to make it, why you'd like to make that change last. Sustainability is a founding principle in the Smart Policing Initiative, and the points on this slide really define the role of sustainability in the SPI. And several of these points are worth some discussion. Sustainability is something that should be stressed early on. If you begin your discussions of sustainability at the last few months of your project, you've waited entirely too long. Sustainability is something that you need to begin to think about almost immediately when you're having those initial discussions. The second point is that sustainability does not happen by accident. Sustainability comes through strategic planning. It comes through a deliberate process where you're thinking about the key issues. So it's something that is planned. Sustainability also requires buy-in from all levels of the organization. Obviously, the leadership level, the chief's office, is critically important to making change last. But you also need buy-in from the line level, from the first-line supervisors, from middle management. You need buy-in from all the levels of the organization. And the other point is that sustainability becomes easier if you also have support and buy-in from those stakeholders who are outside of the agency, whether it be the community or other criminal justice agencies or the business community. Having them engaged will make things much easier. And the last point is, I guess, the flip side of Nola's point from the previous slide, is that some things are not worth sustaining, and we need to keep that in mind, because the SPI is about testing new ideas. It's about pushing the boundaries. And sometimes when you try something new, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work as you intended it to. So not everything is worth sustaining. That's something we need to keep in mind. Another point on sustainability, and we've seen this in the sites in the SPI since 2009, there are really two ways to think about this issue of sustainability. The first is to think about it at a more strategic level, to think about sustaining the principles of SPI, things like crime analysis or collaboration with external stakeholders, or sustaining that research partnership you may have now with the university. But you can also think about sustaining strategies and tactics at a more operational level. So, sites have been implementing a variety of different strategies and tactics, such as problem-oriented policing or hotspots policing, or call-ins and focused deterrence. So you can think about sustaining things at an operational level as well, in addition to the strategic level. This slide is just a selection of some of the successes that we've seen in SPI sites with regard to sustainability. And you can see that the successes go across a wide range of activities, from integrating SPI into performance and promotional exams in Frisco and Glendale, to routinizing collaboration with external stakeholders in Indio, Palm Beach, and Reno, to incorporating SPI into training, whether it be academy training for new recruits or roll call training. We've seen that in a number of sites. So this is just a sampling of some of the successes that we've seen in SPI sites. Now, since BJA and CNA have been at this for a while, we've built up some institutional knowledge with regard to some of the challenges to sustainability. And making change last in a law enforcement agency sometimes can be very difficult. And the list that you see here are some of the most common challenges that we see. Those are challenges to sustainability. For example, getting buy-in internally. The traditional mindset with a grant is often that you write the proposal, you secure the grant, you then deliver what you promised in the grant proposal, write the final report, and then move on to the next thing. And that kind of mindset really undermines efforts at sustainability. A number of agencies have experienced turnover, particularly turnover at the top of the organization, and that can present some real challenges for sustainability. You can see the other challenges that are listed there: external events that are beyond your control, limited resources. These are things that can really serve to short-circuit or undermine your efforts to sustain what you're doing. So I think at this point I'll turn it over to the Indio folks, and they can begin their presentation on sustainability.
Thank you, Mike. This is Erica Martinez with the Indio Police Department. Joining our team this morning is our Chief of Police, Richard Twist, our SPI Community Outreach Coordinator, Ivan Carrillo, and our research partner, Dr. Robert Nash Parker. So this morning we'd like to start our presentation by giving you a brief overview of the project, of our Indio SPI project. Our target problem when we started in 2010 was increasing residential burglary crime. So our research team set out to try to better understand the causes of burglary patterns in the city by creating a predictive profile of burglary hotspots. So that was the focus of our project. So with regards to challenges to sustaining initiatives such as SPI, our team has identified two main challenges. First and foremost, we identify funding as a challenge, specifically when it comes to retaining key project staff. So for example, this could be a challenge for agencies, and it could potentially undermine their ability to initiative once the funding ends. Specifically, with SPI, this is a type of initiative that requires a multi-year commitment from an agency with regards to not only just time, but also personnel resources. So this gets us to what Mike mentioned earlier, limited resources. So it's important for agencies to really think about the way they will be able to sustain this project, and early on it's important to identify funding sources that will help them retain project staff. Our department, for example, we recognize the value of the SPI initiative overall, but we also recognize the value of the Smart Policing Community Outreach Coordinator position. So what we did, we developed a plan to earmark both local and federal funding sources to retain this position after the grant ended. So this is something that helped us overcome the funding challenge. But in addition to funding, we also believe that sustaining the research-based partnership is also a challenge, or could potentially be a challenge. So with initiatives such as SPI, you not only want to sustain the initiative, but you also want to continue to foster the initiative, to develop the initiative for years to come. So in our case, for example, the SPI project was our first formal research partnership. So it was very important for our team to be able to sustain the partnership with Dr. Parker after the funding ended. So this was something that was very important for us. However, we believe that other agencies may not be able to sustain this type of partnership, especially if it's a small agency. Normally, a small agency or even a medium-sized agency, they don't necessarily earmark research partnerships into their annual budget. So this could be, a challenge for them. But beyond funding, again, it's not just about funding, but also being able to sustain these partnerships, and not only sustain it with regards to the resources, but also an effective partnership that is able to last beyond SPI or beyond a research-based project. So later in this presentation, Dr. Parker is going to elaborate a little bit more on this particular challenge and how we have been able to make it work for here at the Indio Police Department. And he's going to be able to go into ways that they may be able to overcome that challenge and try to foster a more effective partnership. So with that, I turn over our presentation to our Chief of Police.
Good morning. When we were asked to speak to the importance of sustainability and provide a definition, our definition is the nourishment of a strategy that reduces or prevents criminal activity and enhances the quality of life in a community. And the responsibility for the chief executive, I believe, is thinking about succession planning, not only in terms of staffing, but also with regard to sustainable public safety initiatives, and as Mike spoke to, successful public safety initiatives, weaving them into the culture of the organization. To further enhance what we've done with SPI and Indio, in June of this year, we established the Office of Community Safety. And what the Office of Community Safety does is it brings three missions together. Our quality of life strategy, our SPI burglary and truancy prevention strategy, and our violent crime suppression strategy in the city of Indio, as a way of further embedding our evidence-based efforts into the Indio Police Department, and rooted in the successes of SPI. What I'd like to do is call on Dr. Parker to speak to the research partnership that we've forged with him and the University of California at Riverside.
Thanks, Chief Twist. The challenges around sustainability research partnership are somewhat distinctive from the general sustainability issues, in my view. Well, one of the issues, of course, is the funding, which is in common to both. And I probably shouldn't say this over the public webinar, but I would be willing to keep working with Indio even if they didn't come up with additional funding. So that's the secret I'm not supposed to reveal. But the funding does make it a lot easier to sustain the partnership. As a university professor, I'm charged with doing research and teaching in service. And part of working with Indio falls under our university service message or initiative, providing expertise back to our communities. And I'm fortunate to be at a university that really emphasizes that. Some universities do emphasize this and some don't. So that's one challenge for sustainability there, is to hopefully have a partner at a university that pays attention to giving back resources and expertise to the community. But it's a tremendous vote of confidence, I feel, from my colleagues in India, that they worked so hard to come up with an alternative source of funding to keep our initiative going at the same level that it was under the grant funding. It does make it much more easier for me to prioritize work with Indio, to focus on it, to deliver products on time in a timely manner when the funding is in fact there to support the relationship. But I also think that another issue around sustainability is just the ability of the university partner to have a commitment to the activity. Things can change rapidly in university research careers, and some university researchers will want to run to the next latest project that might be a lot more popular or trendy. But so hopefully finding the right partner who's willing to sustain their relationship with the department is also a key issue for sustainability from the research side.
Good morning to all. Ivan Carrillo here, continuing on with the Indio Sustainability Plan. So here in Indio, we have not only continued our outreach prevention efforts, but have expanded our community programs through OCS, Office of Community Safety. We attribute the sustainability of such community programs to the Indio SPI brand, which we have created through community outreach itself. It has been community outreach which has allowed for us to establish effective lines of communication and partnership with the community. Once public buy-in was better gained, it became much easier for us to sustain the project because now we have the support from our community who was encouraging their police department to continue with our developed strategies. And to note, here in Indio, our SPI successes didn't really fully arrive until our outreach component was fully established and deployed. In addition, it has been the Indio SPI brand created and marketed through outreach that not only has allowed us to obtain a public buy-in, but just as critical, it has also allowed us to obtain an internal buy-in, which, as reviewed earlier, is critical for sustainability. And Chief, I don't know if you would like to comment on the importance of spreading the message to the executive level.
Yes, thank you, Ivan. Last month, Dr. Parker and I had the opportunity to attend and present as one of the SPI sites at the International Association of Crime Analysts Conference in Washington. It was another venue and opportunity for us to get the word out there about smart policing and all the great projects that are taking place throughout the country. Additionally, we were requested to provide a proposal to the California Police Chiefs Association to present at their conference in February of 2015 in Riverside, California. And so that'll be yet another venue where we can speak to evidence-based policing efforts and the projects taking place throughout our nation and spread the good word about SPI. And I think that's key to have representatives at the chief executive level out there expressing the positive impacts that these projects are having in their respective communities to see if we can get additional agencies to come on board and come up with projects, and also work collaboratively with research partners to find long-term solutions to issues impacting their communities.
So I think that all of what our outreach efforts, which we just talked about, are all pretty much summed up in the displaced photos, which are of our most recent outreach event, which was our youth resource fair that we titled Connection. Since the goal of this community event was to connect our city youth and their families with services which they are in need of to help further foster good, healthy, productive adolescence. Over 70 organizations came out to join us and provide information and service to attending families. In addition, we had professional boxing star Timothy Bradley be able to partner up with us and join us for this event. And then in the bottom left-hand picture, we could see Timothy Bradley there, along with some of our attending families. Timothy Bradley is a homegrown role model in the community. He currently lives in the city, and we're going to look forward to continue partnering with him for future events. And then the above image is a picture of our team. We have our school resource officers. We have our CHIP volunteers, CHIP, acronym for Citizens Helping Indio Police. We also have our cadets that are part of our cadet programs. And not in the picture, but at the event, we have executive and command staff all the way, including our chief of police. So I think that it just really shows all the different levels of involvement in our outreach efforts. And then on the right-hand side, we could see our regional symposium, which was held this May and where more than 80 policymakers, educators, government officials, community leaders, representatives from law enforcement and criminal justice agencies from all over the southwestern region of the country joined us for a discussion in the benefits to be obtained for police researcher practitioner partnerships like the one established here in Indio and other SPI sites. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions and answers for the entire Indio SPI team.
Does anybody have any questions for Indio at this point? Chief, I'd like to ask one actually, if you don't mind. You know, I've kind of watched with interest and admiration as you and your team have built this out and built this up in Indio. And it's very significant that you've found the funding to continue the outreach and to support the research. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just talking for a minute about whether that was a difficult thing to do, or how did you convince you know, the people who needed to be convinced that this was a worthwhile expenditure of funds that are probably pretty scarce?
Absolutely, Chip. Well, I think the key to it is transparency, and combined with our community outreach. At each community outreach event, we have at least one or more of our council members that attend. We have other members of city government, the city manager, finance director, who will attend these events. So they get to hear the positive results that are impacting our community, whether it be through our parent project classes that we're providing free of charge to community members, both in Spanish and English, the reduction in burglary crimes occurring in the city, which I believe since 2010 we're down 40%, and that number continues to drop in the community. So we also did presentations to our city council in open forum about smart policing. Each time before we went to a regional presentation, we would present to our city council. So they were embracing the philosophy along with our SPI team in the police department. So, and what we did was we started talking last year about how we could retain Ivan Carrillo's position as our community outreach coordinator during our budget discussions. So we had a plan about a year in advance of identifying funding sources, and we did have to transition a few line items that we had covered using special revenue funds or federal grant monies historically, and incorporate that into general fund money drawdowns. But by the time we were presenting that to council during the budget process, and we also have a Citizens Finance Advisory Committee that engages on budget recommendations, they had embraced our efforts, our smart policing efforts. They had seen the articles, the various press articles, both in live media as well as print media. By our local press, we had international coverage, and then also the UCR publication, University of California Riverside publication, also wrote about our efforts. So every time it seemed like they turned around, they were hearing these positive results that were coming from this project. So the buy-in was really established before we came to council and to the city manager requesting to utilize these funds in a different manner. Did that answer your question, Chip?
Hey, that's great. I really appreciate that answer. Very enlightening. And I think I heard correctly that there is now a CHIP award in Indio, California?
Well, we have CHIP volunteers, and the acronym stands for Citizens Helping Indio Police, and we actually do recognize a volunteer every year at our annual awards banquet.
I heard that. I think it's an amazing coincidence that you chose that name. Very interesting. Very nice. Okay, Mike, I'm sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to ask that question. Let's proceed.
Okay, I think our next presenter is Lowell, Massachusetts.
Hello, everybody. My name is Arthur Ryan. I'm the Deputy Superintendent in charge of operations for Lowell Police Department. And as I'm looking here at my slides, I'm still seeing Indios. Is there something technically I should be doing? Here we go. All right, we're on. Basically, I'm doing this solo today for reasons beyond my control. My partners are otherwise occupied. We've been involved in smart policing for several years now. Our initial program was basically designed to establish a means to attack the problem of drug-dependent people that were basically plaguing our neighborhoods with property crime, house breaks, car breaks, robberies, and what have you. The initial concept was to try to see if we could try some different techniques. And interestingly enough, we split that up into two areas, one of them being typically like a hotspot policing, something that we had become familiar with from prior research that occurred in the city of Lowell. And the second was more offender-based strategies. Sustainability, quite frankly, was something that was on our mind right from the beginning. We had studied smart policing. We were familiar with evidence-based policing. Some of our past experience, not only through the grant process, but through other strategies, had given us a pretty good respect for our crime analysis unit and what information it could provide to us. So it wasn't really a big leap for us to try this experiment of smart policing. What we did right at the beginning is we looked at how we could sustain this. We recognized through past grants and past partnerships that when something is funded from the outside, that we have a difficult time sustaining it once the funding is gone. So what we try to do is we try to embed the smart policing concept within the organization. And the way we did that right from the get-go is we didn't utilize these strategies only when overtime was available or when the partners that we had embraced in this experiment, if you will, this research, when they were available. We started looking at some of the techniques that we were going to use, and we employed them right into the patrol force. We were thinking about smart policing as a concept and not a project. Very similar to our experience as we migrated over to community policing from the professional model back in the early to mid-90s. We recognized that we were not looking for smart policing units, if you will. We weren't trying to specialize. What we were trying to do is try to indoctrinate the entire department, detectives and investigators of different sorts, as well as the majority of our patrol operations, to understand the benefit of working with crime analysis and letting the data drive some of the patrol strategies. And we did that through, and quite frankly, at the beginning, without actually using some of the funds that were available to us. We also looked at updating the policies and institutionalizing some of the practices. And through our second SPI funded research, we established a basically like a vertical advisory group consisting of members of the department, both sworn and non-sworn, literally from every level of the organization, in a very open forum that was chaired by our captain. In that, through that forum, we were able to really get the word out of what it was we were trying to accomplish and what the benefits of smart policing would be for the department. One of the things that we wanted to do to sustain smart policing was to build that data-driven law enforcement tactics and strategies and to make them economical. And that, again, goes back to what I just mentioned, is to make them economical means that we couldn't rely on outside funding. Of course, that also presented some challenges, which I'll discuss in a little bit. Utilizing our police research partnerships was really not that difficult for us. We had established research partners in the past. We have a university that has a very robust criminal justice program, sociology program in the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. And also, we have extensive experience with Brenda Bond, Dr. Brenda Bond from Suffolk University, who in fact, at one point early in her career had worked at the Lowell Police Department, so we had established a very strong relationship there. It proved to be very beneficial as we began this process. So what are the questions that we asked ourselves when we were building the plan? And again, are we relying too much on outside funding while testing these concepts? The smart policing grants did provide us with money that we could use for overtime so that we could take and put more officers into some of these areas where we were looking as far as the hotspot goes. Also to provide home visits and some of the targeted enforcement actions and surveillances that we employed on our offender-based prong to this experiment. Now, if you look at your slide, you'll see whose driving force is at the bottom, but it's kind of backwards. The way we started out is we determined right at the beginning that it was going to be, this program was going to be led by the patrol force. Typically, we have units or we have other areas of the department that might be involved in some of the, the experimental stuff in the grants. But I believe by immediately putting this right on the head of, it was my role as the deputy in charge of operations, and it was a day-to-day activity that I employed, and I quickly was able to bring in the captains that worked for me from the various shifts and sectors, and then quickly they were able to then play it forward, so to speak, so that you had your supervisors and then your line officers understand what we were trying to do. And one of the things that was very beneficial to us was we took a lot of time explaining what it was we were trying to accomplish, and we gave the officers an opportunity to weigh in on what they thought the benefits are, or what they thought how they could benefit. In fact, the offender-based prong, the list of offenders was actually derived from detectives and patrol officers who were out on the street, who were able to identify to us who those individuals that were creating the biggest problem were. So, I mean, in that respect, I guess what we're really talking about is buy-in. The other thing that we did, and I heard Indio mention this as well, and is we let everybody know what we were doing. We spoke at community groups and we discussed what smart policing was, not simply the program we were working on, but what the concepts were, and kind of introduced evidence-based policing to everybody. We did this also at a political level, and one of the real benefits of this is during this period of time when our smart policing initiative was underway, we experienced some other public safety issues and problems in the city, particularly some of the gun violence and the shootings and gang issues that plaguing many departments our size and cities our size across the nation. And we started to explain to the powers to be and the individuals that really had control over the finances in the city what we were doing with smart policing and how those same concepts could be utilized to address the issues that they found very disturbing and, quite frankly, became the driving force between, some of even the local elections, if you will. Smart policing was a common term being utilized by candidates for the city council and beyond. And we went before the city council on a couple of occasions, and we were granted additional funds from the city in order to develop some strategies to address that problem as well as others. So I think rehashing, I heard the same thing from Indio again. When should you start thinking about sustainability? And quite frankly, I believe it should be something that gets discussed right at the beginning. And if you don't do that, I really see it going to be very difficult to succeed. I have an example many years ago, probably about 15 years ago, the district attorney's office in our county received a grant that allowed them to put 3 district attorneys right out in the field with our officers in our storefront precincts. I was a captain at the time in one of those precincts, and I had literally an assistant district attorney that was in a desk right next to me. And I could see firsthand for a year while that grant was active, officers coming in and conferring with the district attorney getting involved in many of the more minor cases, before the arrest was made, and consulting and everything else, and it was tremendously beneficial. But like many grants that we had seen in the past, as soon as the grant was over, that assistant district attorney then returned to the courthouse, and that program basically did not sustain itself. I had that in the back of my mind when we were talking about smart policing, and I realized, I think, maybe we were a little too confident that these strategies were going to be successful. But in any event, we did have in our mind right at the beginning that we wanted to make sure that we could do this without having to rely on somebody else paying for it. And that is critically important. The other thing that we realized is that we had to get this message up and down the chain of command. It can't be something that is just, the deputy chief saying, you're going to do this. And now if I fast forward to this, this place in time where we've been doing this for several years now, on a daily basis, I get a report from each one of the 3 shifts. And part of that report, it's an activity that's emailed, and part of that report is what the sergeants are doing with their officers. And that one of the things that you'll see is that in that report is that they're coming up with their own smart policing initiatives, if you will, to address the problems that are occurring on the different shifts, different days of the week, etc. And it's ever fluid. This was not without any challenges, obviously. One of the things that we were concerned about was officer resistance and hesitation. This is another thing from above. However, it really didn't come out to be as big of a problem as we thought it was. We had the experience of a major organizational change in the past through the community policing efforts, and it really wasn't that difficult to get the officers on board, particularly the younger officers who are so technically savvy, where they really did like the idea of utilizing data in their decision making and having the data drive some of their patrol procedures. The other challenge is that over the last couple of years we went through a chief selection process, and that of course created some vacancies right up the chain of command. So we had people moving around. So some of the individuals, if you will, that were really involved in smart policing, just by nature of our job, ended up in other assignments. We thought that was going to be a problem. It was not as big an issue as we expected it to be. The delays in the promotional process that occurred because of some other outside factors created some difficulty in us to putting some some change in place and some organizational change. We did some trying to do some work with our community policing efforts, which is something else I think that it's important to mention, is that we did some organizational change. We created some change, and we created an environment which smart policing could flourish. But at the same time, we were very, very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We were very careful not to, forget where the benefits of the community policing and the achievements we had made with our community and our outreach, and simply start patrolling as robots, if you will, because of data-driven individuals. So we had to turn around and try to figure a way of dovetailing these in together. And again, that goes back into the communication and the idea that we speak to the people in the community groups who represent their various neighborhoods. We speak to the political leaders that are updated by their constituencies, and we make sure that every entity understands what it is we're trying to do, and we give them an opportunity to weigh in on our priorities. I guess if I could just kind of recap where we are right from the beginning. We started out with the SPI project to deal with a particular issue. We did it with the idea that we wanted to try this type of policing as an experiment. It was a successful experiment. And as a result of that, we maintain it now in our police department through our regular budget process. We have been able to sell the concept externally so that it's supported by the political and the community, and as well as our partners in the district attorney's office and the social service agency. So I believe, just like I heard some very encouraging things from Indio, and I believe a lot of the things that you guys spoke about, we also experienced here in Lowell, and it leads me to believe that we've kind of found a roadmap, if you will, of success and sustainability. I'll entertain questions at any time.
Okay, if we have no questions, I guess we can move on to the third and final presentation from Pullman, Washington.
Okay, thank you very much. My name, let's see if I can get this going here. Onto the right slide, that is. All right, thank you very much. My name is Zachary Hayes. I'm formerly of Washington State University, where Pullman is, and I'll be presenting today with Chief Gary Jenkins of the Pullman PD. We're going to be talking about sustaining smart policing in regards to how it works specifically for us in our in our safety camera initiative. And the object of our study was to address some crime issues that Pullman had been experiencing in the area of the WSU campus. We had a number of serious issues regarding alcohol-related incidents and violence. And the idea was that if we could install some safety cameras in those high-crime areas, we might be able to reduce the incidence of those events. And so we installed the cameras with the intent to reduce crime not only through deterrence, because we understand that oftentimes when you're dealing with incidents that are related to alcohol, people aren't rationally thinking that often. So it wasn't just about deterrence for us. It was also about attempting to improve police response capabilities by allowing them to view these camera feeds so that they could see events before they became criminal events. For example, if officers were witnessing a large gathering of people who appeared to be jumping up and down and shouting at each other, it might give them a sense that, okay, maybe we need to get over there before this shouting and jumping turns into pushing, shoving, and fighting. And we also thought that the cameras would help aid in prosecutions by providing more video evidence of some of the incidents that did occur in those areas. So we installed the cameras, and we also, at the same time, conducted a three-wave community survey that was aimed at assessing how people in our community, both the WSU students and the Pullman community residents, were responding to the fact that we had cameras in the area. We have had a little bit unique project in the sense that of our technological component. Having those cameras up in this area on the WSU campus was a visible and very constant reminder of exactly what we were doing with the safety camera initiative. So people were well aware and consistently well aware of exactly what was going on, not only because of the cameras, but because of signs that we had posted for legal reasons, letting people know they were entering an area that was being viewed by these cameras. So it was very important to us that we understand how the community felt, not only about the project, but also about the police department in and of itself, because in order to sustain the project, in order to sustain the ability to keep these cameras live and active, it was important that we had the public's backing. So we conducted the survey, and we found that the survey let us know that public satisfaction with both the police and with our camera project increased over the entire grant period, over the 3 waves of our surveys. The respondents to our surveys generally felt that the cameras affected crime in a positive way, which led them to have a very positive perception of the police. And we also found that the cameras themselves did play important roles in the handling of multiple cases. After speaking with the local prosecuting attorney and many of the officers involved in the police department who had put the cameras to use, we heard very good things about the ability for the cameras to help them get the job done, including on a case where there was an assault of a WSU professor in which the cameras played a crucial role in helping to identify some suspects after people at the scene were reluctant to come forward and assist. And that case actually got not only local and regional, but also some national attention, and if people are interested, Chief Jenkins can speak to that a little bit later. For us, sustainability was very important in 3 or maybe 4 ways. I won't go into how we define sustainability, because we've heard not only how SPI defines it, as you can see on our slide, but also how some of the other departments has defined it as well. But for us, sustainability was really boiled down to making sure that we had continued buy-in and continued support from 3 primary sources. First, the police officers and the police staff. It's very important that the officers and the staff understand exactly what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, in order for them to be willing to participate and willing to help it be a success. Fortunately, we were able to do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But another major issue for us was making sure we maintained our working relationship between myself and my other research partners and with the Pullman PD. Now, as you may have noticed on our opening slide, I am no longer at WSU, and now I'm down in California at Cal State Bakersfield. But I and my other research partners who did remain at WSU continue to have a good working relationship with the Pullman PD. And we will be working together in the future, not only on this project, but also on planned research papers and manuscripts that are intended to come out of the SPI grant project. So continuing and maintaining a working relationship was also very important for us. And then finally, because of our unique situation where there are constant reminders of exactly what it is the Pullman Police Department is doing with these cameras, we need to absolutely maintain support from the community. And we'll talk again about that, how we did that in just a little bit, but especially in our case where these cameras are there, and cameras in general don't tend to have a very positive image in many people's minds when it comes to thinking about, Big Brother state and things like that. It was very important to us that we not only got support, but we continued to maintain community involvement in the project and in the cameras so that they understand how transparent and how important their input is to us. And the way that we strove to do this was by being very willing and able to adapt to the changes in circumstances that we did see, not only in the planning stages of the project, but also during the project itself and since then. Being able to adapt was very important because it allowed us to do things like take input from the police officers, from our research, myself and my other research partners, and especially the community, to show them that we are dedicated to making sure that everybody is getting the best out of this that they can. And here, you guys will probably see a number of the familiar SPI principles that we're all familiar with after doing our performance measures throughout the project. But we also wanted to discuss how these principles played into our efforts to sustain our safety camera project. And so starting off with the performance measurement and research partnerships, I've already spoken a bit to how the continuing relationship with not only the folks at WSU, but myself and DGSS is where the Division of Governmental Studies and Sciences at WSU, where my other research partner, who couldn't be with us today, is formerly located. The continuing relationship between the partners and the police department is very important to us because, like we said, this isn't just about studying what happened with the SCI project, but being able to maintain that relationship so that we can continue studying the camera project after the official grant project period ended, but also maintaining that relationship so other projects can be started and not having to start from scratch in terms of building up a relationship. The outreach and collaboration, especially with the community, as we spoke about, was very important for our project, especially the sustainability aspect, because if we want to maintain the public support, we had to set a standard for continued transparency and openness for this project so that the public will be more willing to move forward in a positive way with the police department and with WSU and other researchers as we move on to other projects. For this project, we sought specifically to engage the public through a number of open forums, which allowed not only students but business owners and also residents in the area surrounding WSU where these cameras were going to be installed. We set forums so that they could give us feedback, not only on how the cameras and the project would work, but also to set policies for how we would use the evidence from the cameras, where they could not be aimed, etc. And so we set a really good framework and a really good foundation for continuing to have transparency and openness with the Pullman and WSU communities. In regards to managing organizational change, this is something that Indio and Lowell talked about a lot as well. And some of the things that we did at Pullman was make sure that our officers understood exactly what it is we were doing and how we were going to do it, but also how it could help them in the long run. And so we held, or the Pullman PD held team meetings in order to emphasize some of the new policies and procedures that stem from having the cameras, including new recording requirements for officers so that they would have to list exactly how they came to know about some of the incidents that they were involved in. Was it a call-in from the community? Was it a proactive officer initiation? Or was it perhaps being able to see something on those cameras and then going and getting involved in a situation that you would not normally have got involved in because there were no calls and there weren't any patrols in a certain area. So it was important that the police officers understood exactly what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And additionally, it was important that they understood what our role as the research partners was and why we were there. In many cases, and as we've heard in other SPI webinars and presentations and meetings, there is some historical tendencies for police departments and police officers and research universities and researchers to have some hesitancy to working together. Fortunately for us, myself and my other research partners already had a working relationship with the Pullman PD that had stemmed from my involvement in some of our other research partners' involvement in local community advising committees for the local PD. And because of those relationships, we were not only able to work together on the safety camera initiative, but moving forward also working on the Pullman's body-worn camera project has allowed officers to become familiar not only with us as researchers, but also familiar with us as people so that both officers and us as research partners understand where the other side is coming from and some of the concerns that each side might have so that we can work better together. Then for strategic targeting, we also made efforts right from the get-go, even before we had started applying for the project, to identify where it is that our efforts be best used. And so we, with the help from some of our crime analysts at the Pullman Police Department, we did some crime mapping, and then once we had gotten the research grant, my research partner and I went out and did some interviews with students, with community members, with business owners in the area in order to figure out exactly what they thought was happening on the ground from their perspective, because sometimes what we see on a crime map doesn't always match up to what the community thinks is going on. And so we made strategic efforts to maximize the input both from the community and from our crime analysts in order to make sure we were putting these cameras in the areas that would be the most beneficial. And finally, and I believe Indio spoke to this a little bit as well, making the best use of the intelligence and the data that we got from this project is another important part of sustainability, because just taking what you learn from one grant and stopping there and moving on is not engaging in sustainability. So one of the things that we did from the get-go was set up the Pullman Police Department to be able to continue being able to use some of the services that we initially provided through the grant, but continue to use even beyond the grant. For example, the WSU Student Monitoring Internship for one of the faculties in the WSU Criminal Justice Department. He was teaching class in technology and had his students aid the police department by getting trained and then watching and observing the safety cameras in order to help alert the local dispatch and the local department and officers to situations that might require their attention. Additionally, we also worked into the community survey portion that was primarily for the grant purposes aimed at understanding how the community felt about the cameras and the police. But we also worked into it a number of additional questions that myself and the other research partners can continue to use well beyond the end of the grant project in order to conduct more research and engage in other research efforts with the Pullman Police Department. So in this way, once the project ended, we're still making use of the intelligence that we're getting from the project and also getting more and more information and more research opportunities from the survey that, although it did end during the project, still has opportunity to provide a lot more future research opportunities. Now I'll turn it over to Chief Jenkins to discuss the rest of our project.
Great, thank you, Zach. So there's a number of challenges to making a technology project sustainable from a hardware angle. For a technology project like ours to be sustainable, we had to consider ahead of time repairs, replacement, maintenance, and future upgrades to the equipment. For example, if we plan for a lifespan for a camera or a radio link to be 5 years, what's the impact to our project if replacement is needed after 1 year, and can we accommodate for that? And we also needed to determine who could perform the maintenance and repairs and then what those costs would be. And could our in-house staff perform most of that maintenance, and so we'd only experience a soft dollar cost? Or do we need to contract out for maintenance and repairs, need to budget for that for hard dollar costs for repairs and maintenance? Also, how sustainable would our project be if equipment is vandalized? And if it is vandalized, can we replace it, or do we continue with a modified plan to move forward? So all of these issues impact the sustainability of a technology project. So as you've heard already from from Lowell and Indio, you have to look at sustainability from the get-go. And so we looked at sustainability issues really to help drive the project design. We sought out solutions that our in-house staff could support and maintain. We purchased some testing equipment, we purchased some backup hardware to support sustainability, and we mitigated vandalism issues by purchasing cameras and camera housing and designing camera placement to be vandal resistant. So with regard to monitoring the cameras, we never initially intended to assign personnel to actively monitor the cameras. Our intent was for officers to view the live feed at their discretion, and then during peak times, they could view the cameras, or if the call was made to the area, then they could go to the monitors and look and see what was going on. But during the project, the Washington State University Student Intern Program was developed, and that's where criminal justice students at Washington State University volunteered to monitor the cameras during peak times. So that was a positive development during the project, but it was kind of a two-edged sword too, because it created an expectation by the public and officers for that continual monitoring during peak times. So in actuality, that may be a part of the project that may not be sustainable. It will depend on the willingness of the Washington State University Department of Criminology to continue the program, or it may require us to develop a volunteer monitoring program. Otherwise, that part of the program might be discontinued. For effectiveness of the cameras, while we did have the public support for the cameras, or sometimes it's just really a lack of opposition, we were able to mitigate privacy concerns of the public through our efforts to be inclusive and transparent by including the public in the development of our camera policy. But it's possible, really, that that only bought us enough goodwill to give us enough time to prove the effectiveness of the cameras so that we could show that their worth outweighs privacy concerns and that their value was worth the cost to maintain them. And so we were anticipating that we needed to continually prove their effectiveness, because if we couldn't continually prove the effectiveness and value, then we felt we would lose public and political support. So, this has been a mantra that you've heard throughout this presentation from all of the organizations about public support and acceptance. And so we recognized that we needed to continue to show our transparency and engage the public in a continual conversation, even if it was just to publicize examples of the benefits of the cameras. So again, this is something that I think has been a point of emphasis throughout the presentation, and it's really designing in sustainability from the beginning of the project. And so during the early stages of our project, we discussed potential challenges or roadblocks to the project, and not just the mechanics of the hardware and the video and the procedures that we needed to implement internally, but we also knew that the relationships between all the stakeholders would be important. So the researcher-police relationship was, of course, key, because we needed some level of trust to work effectively. And as Zach pointed out, we were lucky that we already had developed some of those relationships, particularly between the researchers and the police command level, but not necessarily at the police line level. So we were very intentional about the way we introduced the project and engaged the officers with the researchers to let that trust develop. And of course, gaining public support was critical, because public opposition could have completely derailed the project from a political angle. So as the project progressed through implementation, we discovered issues that could impact sustainability that we didn't anticipate. But that was okay, because as long as we could be adaptive throughout the process, we knew that the project could move forward. I felt that if the researcher-police relationship was not good and we had little trust between them, we would have been relegated to a very rigid plan with little room for discretion to make changes as we needed. But because our partner relationship was developed so well, and we had developed that level of trust, then we could independently make changes or modifications that were needed as the project continued, so that the project could move forward on a very adaptive level. I'd say the most significant example of this is the incorporation of the WSU Student Intern Camera Monitoring Program. That was a significant change to the project from both the researcher and police perspective, but each partner was able to adapt to accommodate that change to the benefit of the project. So we weren't stuck with a very rigid plan. So in conclusion, we planned for potential challenges and contingencies that ultimately helped us, but we also realized that we couldn't anticipate every challenge. So we needed to be flexible to be able to make changes. And the strong partnership between the researchers and the police created trust that facilitated independent changes. And that continued collaboration will help us to quantify the value of the project to stakeholders, particularly police staff and public, as we move forward. And we understand that we must continue efforts to sustain the project, such as exhibiting value to police staff and the public to maintain support. So with that, Zach or I would be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay, if we have no questions, this is Mike White again, and I know we're approaching the end. I'll just offer some closing thoughts and some discussion of some of the lessons from the different presentations. I mentioned at the start of the webinar that BJA and CNA have built up an institutional knowledge regarding some of the challenges to sustainability, and they've also built up some institutional knowledge with regard to successful strategies to overcome those barriers, and that's where I wanted to end up with, was to talk about some of those strategies, and I think the three presentations from today demonstrate that this knowledge base of how to deal with challenges to sustainability continues to grow. And for each one of these points that I'll go through very quickly, I think we can point to examples from Lowell, from Indio, and from Pullman that we heard about today that illustrate these points. So, for example, integrating SPI into training and using that as a way to memorialize the principles of SPI. I think that with the organizational change that Lowell was involved in, training was a critical piece for them to sustain their changes. Creating a cross-sector agency working group to guide the SPI, that is removing the SPI from the domain of just a single unit. That was a theme we heard from with Lowell. It was also a theme we heard from with regard to the Pullman presentation. Integrating the SPI activities into the regular duties of officers and staff. The reliance on overtime to support SPI activities kind of perpetuates that short-term grant-focused mindset where you can do this as long as you have the grant, and then when the money is gone, the project is gone. And I think the best example we heard today on this point was Indio and the creation of the Office of Community Safety and Ivan's role in that new OCS really demonstrated that point very, very well. The point on communicating and marketing activities, we actually heard the term spreading the good word both inside and outside of the agency. The presentations in Indio and in particular with Pullman, working with community members, making sure that they were knowledgeable about the cameras and were supportive, really demonstrates that point really well. And that flows very nicely into the next point, which is engaging the other stakeholders, especially the community. And again, that was a theme that was raised by each of the presentations. And then last, making sure that SPI agencies are flexible. Course corrections are necessary for a variety of reasons, for external factors that are unanticipated, to simply, things are not working out as intended, so you need to change directions a little bit. And I think, each of the presentations demonstrated this point, in particular Lowell, I think, with the issues that they were dealing with organizational change. So I think at this point I'll turn it back to Chip, and I'm not sure if we have time for any additional questions or if you have some final comments before we end the webinar.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks everybody today for your participation and presentation. I know we did go a little bit over time, but I thought these presentations were actually quite interesting and quite important, so I was happy to give everybody the time that they needed to make their points. I think one thing I'm taking away from this, and we have been dealing with this for a long time in smart policing, is I think there are several sites that actually make good and creative use of the media, and their relationships with their local press has obviously contributed to their prospects for sustainability. So I'm not sure how much we have stressed that in the past. I think that's a very important point. I'm happy to take a question or a comment or two from anybody that's on the line right now, and if not, we'll just thank everybody again and close up. But there is a chance for a final thought or comment from anybody. Okay. I thank everybody again. Nice job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.